How's it going, guys? My name is Scott. Welcome to my brand new channel, Williams Builds. On this channel we're going to be focusing on what is my passion. My passion is cars. Ever since I can remember, I've been interested in cars. I've always wanted to fix cars, wanted to repair cars, or make cars better. I've done loads of cars over the years, but I've never documented it before. I'm not a trained mechanic. I've never had any official training. But now I want to document the rebuilds with the help of my two sons, Ryan and Reese. So we're going to do it right here, at home, in my drive. We'll take damaged cars, we'll take broken cars, we'll rebuild them, we'll make them better. So to get started, let's go see what we've got. So here is my accident damaged 2017 BMW M140i. It looks as though it's been in a bit of a whack with another car due to the tyre marks down the side, but overall the damage doesn't look too bad. A nice easy one to get started with and maybe do a few mods along the way. I just love that Valencia orange colour. Main damage appears to be right on the front corner, with the damage extending onto the driver's door. The bonnet still does look to be sitting relatively straight on the passenger side, so I think the damage is limited to the front right. It does unfortunately have LED headlights as standard, so I imagine they will be expensive compared to the normal headlights. Both the driver and passenger airbags are blown, and that has caused some damage to the dashboard, so unfortunately we'll have to replace the whole dash, which is a job I've never done before. Amazingly though, it does look as though it hasn't broken the windscreen, which is a bit of a bonus. The overall condition of the car looks really clean. It only has 41,000 miles in it. It looks like it's been well looked after. We'll have to check for suspension damage, but we can do that later. Let's get started. So when you first turn the ignition on, it comes up with all sorts of alarms. Unsurprisingly, most of them seem to be linked to the accident. It's got service due, which was around about the time it was serviced. It's got restraint system alarms, driver restraint system, passenger restraint system, fuel reserve, which is pretty standard from Copart. And if we go into the iDrive system, once we try and clear it, we go to vehicle information, vehicle status, and we go down and check the control. It comes up with restraint system, driver restraint system, passenger restraint system, remote control replace batteries, and unsurprisingly, side daytime lights fault. That'll be due to that smashed headlight. Now we're going to try and start the car, see how that sounds. Sounds alright. Well, it certainly sounds as though it's running fine. It's not making any weird noises, and there's certainly no smoke coming from the car. When under the bonnet doesn't seem to be too bad. It doesn't seem to be too much damage. The structure of the car certainly looks straight. The slam panel looks straight enough. Biggest bit seems to be the damage to the brackets that hold the wing on. I'm sure we'll be able to get some of them. Obviously the headlights are LED headlights. I think that's going to be really expensive, but we'll find out. We'll have a look when we're going to try and buy them. Where are we got to start on, Ryan?
We've got to start by taking off the broken bits.
Okay. I think we'll start with that. So putting the video on a bit of time lapse, we will start by jacking the car up and removing the front wheel in order to gain access to inside the arch liner. We do have a quick check of the wheel here just to make sure it's not buckled, and it looks okay initially. Now removing the damaged arch liner. It's held on with a lot of little 8mm bolts, so just start by removing them, and then once we get that out we'll just chuck the arch liner to the side. This arch liner is actually beyond repair, so we'll have a look for one of them on the internet in a little while. I think for this build we will mainly have a look on eBay, try and get some second hand parts. We will try and get panels in the correct colour to try and cut costs where possible. We will try and also stick to OEM parts. Next up is removing the front wing. It does have mainly 10mm bolts along the top. There is a little trim along the top which I'm removing with a trim tool here, and then that allows me access into 2 more bolts to allow the removal at the top of the front wing. Once the top wing bolts are removed, we can move on to looking for some of the other bolts that are holding it on. I'm sure it's not just held on at the top. There is a little bolt actually in behind the door here, so with the door open we can access that one. There are 2 8mm bolts at the front of the wing here, and then I had to pull the side skirt back slightly to access one last 10mm bolt. Once that bolt's removed, it allows me just to lift the front wing away from the car. Next up is the removal of the headlight. There is a couple of Torx bolts at the top that I'm just removing now. And then once they're removed, there is a few small 10mm bolts at behind the headlight. However, they're not actually holding much on at the moment due to the state of the headlight. The headlight is actually split into 3 separate parts, and it almost comes out in 3 separate parts, but just pretty much wires holding it together. Thankfully at this point the bumper's actually broken. It's actually gave me a little bit extra access in to get the headlight out sideways. Just one last wire out and then the headlight's out. Now we're on to removing the bumper. And then take out 5 Torx bolts along the top of the bumper. After this there should only be attached to the front wing on the passenger side, and then there's the bolts along the bottom of the car. So I remove the bolts from the bottom. These are all 8mm. Thankfully the under tray all seems to be in one piece. And at this point I need to get better access, so I'm putting an axle stand under the car and I'm taking it off, moving the jack round the other side, and then I will remove the front wheel from the passenger side as well. This allows me access into the arch liner to get up to the bolts behind the front wing, and at this point the bumper is pretty much only held on by just sitting there and the 2 bolts behind it on the front wing. It was roughly at this point I should have had a better look at the auxiliary radiator on the driver's side because I didn't have it supported, and at this point the bumper actually just falls off, allowing the auxiliary radiator just to fall to the ground. Thankfully I didn't cause any further damage, but I will get that sorted shortly. At this point I somehow lost a little bit of recording because I have actually changed the front headlight bracket here, which is one of the parts I kind of thought that I was going to need up front and changed off camera. I don't know where that footage went, but unfortunately it did disappear. Thankfully it was 3 or 4 bolts and it allowed me to change it. This allowed me to take the auxiliary radiator, put the bracket back in, which I did actually do a little bit of plastic welding off camera as well, just to make it secure again. It really wasn't worth changing it just for a small amount of damage on it, and a couple of little plastic weld pieces allowed me to put it back in. It was also the bottom bracket that was holding it back on. As you can see here, it's just a little bit squint there, so I do give it a little bit of straighten here and get it back in place. Again, it's just 2 10mm bolts at the top, and that puts the bracket back roughly where it should go. Now at the top,
bolts around, you can actually see that the bottom bracket is actually a little bit bent, so we're going to fix that, give it a little bend back with low grips again, and we'll see if we can save the bracket rather than having to buy a new one. The whole point of the build here is actually doing it as OEM as possible. However, I don't want to break the bank. I have a budget here. I want it to be done for a price of less than I can get one of these undamaged. A little more leverage with no grips. Get that bracket back exactly where I want it. I'm not changing the bracket just for that. One final bolt back in the bottom. Tightened up the spec. And the auxiliary radiator just clips back in. So, however, you will see the auxiliary radiator does have a slight twist in it. However, it is not leaking. If it does start to leak, I may or may not change it in the future. We'll see how it goes.
Today we're going to start rebuilding the front of the car and get it one step closer to being back on the road, but first I want to take you through how I sourced some of the parts. I did initially think about going straight to BMW and buying brand new panels, however I don't think that would have been very cost effective. As I said before, I am trying to get this car how I want it, built to the spec that I want, for the same or less than I could have bought just a plain one that hasn't been damaged. Therefore, I turned to eBay to search through some of the breakers that were advertising on there. I looked at complete front end packages, however, some of these had more parts than I required and they were working out about £3,500. Again, not very cost effective. I could have sold some of the parts I didn't use, but I only really want the parts that I need. Then I started looking at parts individually. I also determined that I could get parts in the correct colour, and that would save me a little money down the road on respray costs. The car's still going to get fully resprayed to get it all matched in, but if the back of the panels are the right colour, then hopefully that'll just save a little time and effort during the respray. I got a bonnet for £400 delivered. It looks to be in great condition. Now, it is from a pre-LCI model, so it is a couple of years older, however the condition is fantastic. I did do a bit of research at this point and found out that the wing and the bonnet from an LCI and a pre-LCI model are exactly the same part number, and when they've arrived they appear to be identical. The wing, it was nearly £130, however when it arrived it had a little bit of damage on it, so I got a partial refund on that and that took the cost of the wing down to £65. The headlight, well, when I was looking at the headlights that was another story. It was £700 average price on eBay for an LED headlight. I did find one that was poorly advertised, ended up getting it for £203. It does have a little bit of damage to one of the mounting brackets, however nothing a bit of epoxy resin glue won't fix. Wing brackets £30, arch liner £30, headlight support bracket came in at £30 as well, and the crash bar was another £100. So all in all, a bit of saving on the complete front end package. The bumper though, again, looking on eBay, bumpers were coming in at £300 odd. They all had damage of some form or another and I couldn't find one in the correct colour. So I looked a little bit further and found an M2 style one, which is aftermarket. I'm not a big fan of aftermarket bumpers, but at £399 I thought I'll give it a go because I do think it is a slightly nicer looking bumper. If it doesn't work out, we will change it back and get the proper bumper for, again, further down the road. All the parts are now here, so let's go and fit them.
And for a little bit of inspiration and fuel, we're underway. Now at this point I am going to start putting the bonnet on. I really should have had some help with this, it was quite heavy and awkward. Thankfully the rams to hold the hinges up are actually on the hinges, and there is hooks on the hinges that allowed me just to manage it myself. Start by putting the 13mm nuts back on, and that holds the bonnet roughly in place. The boys were actually on holiday at this point, so I couldn't even get help from them. At this point I'm just slightly tightening it up. I'm not going to totally tighten it at the moment, I just want to take it and I'm going to start a little bit of alignment. I can't align it too much because I've not got the other front wing on just yet and I don't know how it's going to sit. I'm now going to fit new wing brackets that I've just freshly painted off camera with a spray can. They are a little bit bright, but they're not going to be seen and they're now no longer blue. Just 3 10mm nuts that takes them back in. Been careful to align them back up to the original paint marks. That way hopefully it'll be back in alignment with where it was prior to any accident damage. Now refitting the wing back on the car. It is a bit fiddly just to get everything all kind of lined up. There is a couple of bits where just where it hooks together it's a bit awkward getting it back on. However, it seems to be going back on pretty well and it does look pretty straight. There's a few 10mm nuts back on the top of the wing. Not fully tightening them at this point until we get some alignment done. I don't know how well it'll line up at this point with that door. The door is still pretty badly damaged and I will change that in a later video. One nut up the top which is in behind the plastic cover. I'm just using my extension bar here just to get it back in. And then refit the wing back down the bottom of the A-pillar. Spending a little bit of time on this just now, getting it pretty much lined up, will help further down the line getting the panel alignment correct. Then once we're happy with the position of the wing, we can actually close the bonnet and just start to check for alignment. As you can see here, it isn't actually too bad straight away. I will make a few adjustments just to get it a bit better. At this point I start to refit the headlight. Now the headlight is really fiddly to get in past the bracket and it would be impossible with the bumper back on. As you can see here, when we try to get it back into the bottom bracket, eventually get it in there, and then I can start putting a couple of the little 10mm screws back in. Also the little torque screws on the top to get it back in. Unfortunately, when I was transferring over the DRLs, a couple of electrical connectors were broken, so unfortunately the headlight isn't going to work at this point, but just getting it back together, making sure the panel alignment, making sure the car can go back together in one piece is my priority here. There we go, that's headlight pretty much back in place, ready for the next parts to go back on.
Bumper itself doesn't look too bad. I actually feel it's decent enough quality. There's a couple of bits that are a little bit twisted. I'll use a heat gun once I've built the back of it up, just to try and straighten it out a little bit. I did have a little trial fit out on the car. Actually looks quite good. I've got to put it together now.
At this point here I am just going to start adding all the plastic bits in, all the grills, the little strengthening brackets that go behind it, just to make sure the bumper's got its correct rigidity before I fit it. Everything seems to clip in rather well, they are quite tight. Unfortunately I'm going to have to take them back out again when it goes for paint. I don't want any overspray on the black grills, but we'll manage that once it's been refitted. The main thing here, I just want to make sure the bumper fits properly before we do it. You will notice the bumper does have parking sensor holes. The car itself doesn't have parking sensors. I'm not too concerned about that. I'm going to buy some parking sensors, we'll get them fitted in. I may or may not code them in and get a wiring loom and get them all wired up. They may end up just dummy parking sensors. At this point I thought I'd try out one of my new toys, quick jacks, just to get the car up at a better height for working on. Let me tell you, they are absolutely wonderful. However, I do get some funny looks at the neighbours with the car sitting up in mid-air. At this point I'm putting the crash bar back on, and it's going on really well. It actually went back on without any issues, just showing me that there's definitely no structural damage to the car, and when the bolts just fell into place, I was pretty happy. Just tighten both those bolts up, and then after that we'll refit the foam back onto the crash bar, and that surprisingly wasn't damaged in the accident. And then got to put the bumper back on. The bumper actually goes back on relatively easy, does line up pretty well. I think the headlights do need a little bit more alignment once it's all been painted, but we'll work on that a bit later on. Start with putting 8mm bolts back in to hold it to the wings. These actually line up really well. For an aftermarket part, the fitment is absolutely wonderful. Then I just do the same with the driver's side, get the bolts back in there. Again, all seems to be lining up really well. And then we move on to the top of the bumper, putting in the 5 Torx bolts to secure it at the top. These again all line up really well. This aftermarket part is absolutely surprisingly good. Just checking the alignment again. Once again, the bumper appears to be lining up pretty well, and I'm quite happy with fitment at this point. A couple of little last adjustments, and I'm pretty happy with that.
I just couldn't resist a mod, and at £20 on AliExpress I managed to get a back spoiler. It actually looks quite well for the price. Just got to put on some Tiger Seal, and then we'll put it on the car. Double-sized sticky tape there, Tiger Seal just a wee bit extra. So that's the car pretty much back in one piece. We've just got the door to do. I've got an arch lining just coming that should arrive today. Then it's ready for paint.
Well, I've put it off for as long as I can now. Today I've got to tackle the job I've been dreading. Airbags. Here goes.
So when the passenger airbag deploys, it does destroy the dashboard. In this case, unfortunately, it means the entire dashboard has to be replaced. Now remember, this is a job I've never done before, so this is a learning process, and I may accidentally remove more than I need to, but we'll learn that as we go. So to make as much room as possible and also give the car a good clean inside while we're at it, I thought it would be easiest to remove the front seats. The removal of the seat is by taking out the 2 Torx bolts at the front of the rails, then sliding the seat forward, removal of one bolt that holds the seatbelt in place, and then we can move on to the removal of the 2 rear seat bolts. After this, It's as simple as unclipping the cable underneath the seat, and then the seat simply lifts out. And then we'll take the seat away and just take that out the car just to create a bit more space. The condition of the seat itself seems fine, there doesn't appear to be any damage, however the seatbelt pre-tensioner is deployed, so we will address that a bit later on. And then moving on to the passenger seat, it is the exact same process. The 2 Torx bolts at the front of the rails, one for the seatbelt and the 2 Torx bolts at the back. Sped this one up a little bit, I'm sure you don't want to watch the same process over and over again. However, you can see I'm a bit distracted by the dashboard at this point. I'm just trying to get ideas on what bolts to take out and what screws there is, but we'll get there. Quick look round inside the car, you can see all sorts of crumbs and mess under the seats, absolutely disgusting. Over the passenger side's the worst, there is a jelly baby and I think there is a bit of chicken tikka. So it's in with a hoover at this point and a stiff brush to try and get any last debris out of the carpet. That'll make it a much more pleasant place to work going forward, and also it'll just make the car a bit better. When I do like to keep my cars as clean as possible, so I don't see any reason why these projects should be any different. As you'll see over these videos, I take every opportunity to clean parts before I do put them back on. Doing this also makes it a bit nicer to work in. I'm going to be crawling about in here while removing the dashboard, so the last thing I want to do is crawl about in other people's mess. It's not the worst in here, it's clearly been looked after by the previous owner, it's just some of these areas are harder to get to with the seats in, so always worthwhile every now and again getting a good deep clean. Also, my cars I generally don't tend to eat in them. I had one previous project where I fixed an accident damaged Mini. I don't know how the owner could have even got in the car, it was stinking and there was a full latte discarded in the driver's footwell amongst many other nasty things. So here goes, we've got to start off somewhere, so we'll start by removing the centre steering wheel bolt, that's the only bolt that holds it on. Once that's off we can simply lift the steering wheel away from the spindle and we'll just place that over at the side for safekeeping at the moment. I'll put the bolt back in just so I don't lose it. I've got a funny feeling there's got to be lots of screws and I don't want to lose any of them. Next up is the removal of the steering wheel surround. This is just simply on with a few clips. A trim tool easily separates these and you can start to pull it off. It is a little bit fiddly, but once we get it out we can just take that away. And then I'm going to put some tape over the clock spring to stop it moving. I have seen some videos on YouTube where people have accidentally turned it, it's been out, and then that can give you problems with the steering angle sensor. So just to be on the safe side, I'm making sure that I don't have any issues with this. Then we can remove the 4 small Torx screws holding on the steering wheel controls. And this allows us to then access the cables in behind and we can completely remove it, allowing access to the steering column. At this point the realisation is setting in that I've only just removed the first bits and I've now removed a total of 15 bolts or screws. I should have also said as well that if the airbag had been fitted to the steering wheel, it is simply 2 little springs just that you can access from the back of the steering wheel to remove them. A couple more Torx screws allows me to remove the speedo dials, and I'll take them and put them in the back of the car for safekeeping. Now at this point it really is trial and error, and a lot of the screws are not visible or are hidden behind little removable flaps and panels. Obviously, aesthetically it is a lot better looking, it just makes it more difficult to find them. Also trying to remember where they all come from at this point is starting to add up inside my head, but we'll see how many we're left with at the end. If it's less than a couple, I think I'm going to be quite happy. Now removing some of the Torx screws that seem to hold the bottom of the dash in, and I'm starting to think there isn't too much more on this side holding it in, but I'm sure there will be something I've missed. And with both the boys still on holiday at this point, I really am missing my helpers. This would have probably been a lot faster and a lot more easy to remember if I had Ryan or Reese helping me. Then on to the passenger side. start by removing the side panel from the dashboard. This reveals a couple of screws in there that were pretty hidden. Then remove the silver panel from the front of the dash. This reveals another couple of screws that are holding the glove box in. Once I remove them, I can easily remove the glove box, and this reveals some more screws up in behind the dashboard holding it on. At this point I should add that it is also easier if you do have the replacement dashboard sitting outside the car. You can reference it and see where there is actually screw holes. It does help in the removal of the dashboard. And just like that, out comes the glove box. Removal of the glove box wires for the lights and the switch. Then we can take that and move that to the side at the moment. And this reveals even more screws to be removed from the passenger side of the dashboard. I am putting some of them back in loosely, but the ones that hold the glove box at least. That way it does help when coming back together. Some of the screws are already there. Then we can move on to the centre of the dashboard. Some of the trims just simply unclip. There is a couple of wires here holding that on. Once we remove that, move that to the side, and then that reveals a couple of screws holding the heater controls in the stereo, and that allows us to remove that as well, allowing access into the main radio module behind. Once again revealing more screws. Now I will still add that this has all been done with basic tools. There's nothing more than you can buy in a basic set. So far I haven't used anything more than a trim removal tool and stuff from my Halford socket set. Once the radio module's removed, there's several wires to unplug from the back. Again, these just are quite tight, so a little help from a screwdriver, just unprise them, and that allows me to take that and again set that to the side. This reveals that there's actually bolts at the bottom of the dashboard, which is making me going to have to remove the centre console next. And then two further screws up the top here. This allows you to remove the iDrive screen. Again, unplugging it and putting that to the side as well. For the removal of the centre console, it's as easy as just actually taking the trim from the top, just unprise and remove the iDrive controller. You can also then do the same with the gear stick lever. That then allows you to get access to many more bolts that are holding it in. There's bolts pretty much all the way from the front all the way to the back of the centre console. At this point I should also point out that the aftermarket LED lights that have been put into the dashboard, I found the source of where they were wired into. They were wired into the auxiliary socket underneath the dash. These are all coming out. There is a lot of wire in there and they've just been put in with speed clips. It's not been a very professional installation, but they're going. I don't like them. They need to come out. Again though, just try to find where all the bolts are in the centre console. Sometimes just wiggling the centre console finds out where it's more solid and points you in the right direction of where to look for next. Removal of the rear trim was a bit tricky. The car's quite tight in the back, so put the seat back up for a second. Unfortunately this blocked the camera, but it then showed two 10mm bolts at the back of the centre console that was holding it firmly to the tunnel in the car. So while we're removing the last of the centre console, I thought I would just run through how I sourced the replacement airbags and seat tensioners, and once again I turned to eBay. Now after watching other videos online, I found that you could get what was advertised as an airbag kit. This consisted of dash, airbags and seatbelt tensioners. However, at the time most of them seemed to be between £500 to £1000 depending on where in the country it was. I decided to look at individual parts and found a complete dashboard with passenger airbag for £89.95. I was a bit sceptical of this as it was much cheaper than others, but thought it was worth a go. Seatbelt tensioners were £27.95 delivered and the steering wheel airbag was £120 delivered. All in all, just under £240 by buying the items separately. As you can see there, I have the centre console now out and it's onto the last few bolts on the dashboard. Removing the A-pillar trims does allow a little bit more movement in the dashboard. but there still seems to be one last screw holding it in. Removing the air vent does actually show this screw, and it then allows me to make the dashboard come free at this side. Then removing the passenger ray trim. Lastly, feeding some of the wires from the dashboard out to the back of the dash, then frees up the dashboard fully and allowing me to then remove it from the car. Off camera, compare the dashboards and make sure they're all the same, and thankfully they are, and the dashboard that I got for cheap works out well in the end, and we'll start putting it back in now. Refitting the dashboard is the exact reverse of taking the dashboard out. Thankfully, once you've removed it, it does make it easier if you're fitting it back in the same day. I did this in basically a few hours, and it was all fresh in my memory from where it went and where I could put it all back together. A lot of the parts do go back together in a certain sequence. I did have a couple of times where I put a bit on and then realised I had to take it back off. However, it wasn't too much of a problem, and we got there in the end. Just taking each individual piece, cleaning parts as we go back on. There was some marks on them, some of the centre console did have coffee stains, but overall just a little clean and it goes back together nicely. And once again we will speed the video up, get this dashboard back together a bit quicker. I'm sure you don't want to watch every single screw going back in again. Personally, I actually found this one of the nicer jobs to do. It's not as oily as some of the mechanical jobs, and it has been quite pleasant doing it. It's been a lovely day outside as well, so that makes half the battle. Also, as we're going back together here, just giving another little clean, just any little bits I've knocked out while changing the dashboard, cleaning that up as we go along. And back in with the centre console, get the bolts at the back that needed the seat moved, and then systematically putting all the bolts, rerouting all the cables back into the correct place as we go along. And once that's back in, we can start putting the iDrive control, the gear stick cover, everything all back on as well. Don't know if I'm 100% keen on the brushed stainless trims on the dashboard. I am considering a forged carbon wrap on them, but let me know what you think. Also, if you've made it this far in the video folks, it hopefully means you're enjoying what you're seeing and you're enjoying watching the car being rebuilt. If you are, please hit the like and subscribe button. That lets me know if I'm doing anything right. Dashboard's really starting to come together now. Just getting the centre console stuff back in, getting the stereo back in, getting the fascia controls back on, and it's starting to look like a car again. I really am relieved and pleased at the progress we're making here. It's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. I'm so glad I've tackled it in one day. I wouldn't like to sleep on it and come back to it the next day. Really is key to have this fresh in your mind when you're doing it. If not, take a lot of pictures. Can't stress that enough. I also feel like I've had a major workout today with the amount of climbing in and out of the car and some of the funny positions I've managed to get myself into during this task. This is where a couple of people doing the job would make it much easier, but all in all, I think the task has actually took me less than 3 hours from start to finish if you don't count the times I've out looking at different things. I'm relatively happy with that. Then it's back on with the last of the trims, and then We refit the glove box and the last of the silver trim on the passenger side. Once that's done, the dashboard is then complete. I think at this point it's time to treat myself a well-earned cup of tea. So there we go, a complete dashboard change. I've only got one spare screw. I'm really pleased with that. I don't know where it is. I've had a look, can't find it, but I'm sure one screw is not going to make a difference. I've not put the steering wheel back on yet. I'm going to do something with that and I'll bring it back soon. So there we go. I said I was going to do something with the steering wheel cover. £2 from AliExpress. Put it on myself. I think it looks okay. It's not as good as if it was done professional, but it's a big difference for the standard wheel. And the last bit on the dashboard is just plugging the airbag back in. This just simply plugs back in and pushes back into place onto the two spring clips. I will point out that I did disconnect the battery before I started this job. That is a must for anybody working on any airbags because you don't want to activate them at any time. Then it's onto the seats. I'm only going to show the driver's seat here. First off, start by cleaning it. I got some Gion, I think you could pronounce it, leather cleaner from mycarcleaning.co.uk. I've been buying all my products from there lately. I find it an easy place to get high quality products at decent prices. And this product doesn't disappoint. It really has gave the seats a nice matte finish. I'm not into shiny leather. It basically has brought it back to looking how it came from the factory. Once the seat's cleaned, I then move on to the airbag tensioner. Swapping the airbag tensioner was simply a case of removing one Torx bolt for the side and then removing the two wires from the pin and the multi-connector underneath. Now I will point out that my new airbag tensioners came, when I looked at the plug, the wires were actually round the opposite way. The two colours were in the different slots, so I sat and I changed them back to how it should have been. I'm not sure it would have made any difference, but I wanted to make sure it was right, and making it the same as it was when it came out, in my opinion, was the only way to get it right. Then it was a case of bolting the pre-tensioner back onto the side of the seat. Here you can see the difference between the two seatbelt pre-tensioners. The one on the left is a good one, the one on the right is from the car and it's been fired. You can see it pulls suddenly sharply downwards, and if you've ever pulled your seatbelt hard in the car, it locks out, and basically that's what this does. Basically locking your seatbelt, preventing you from moving forward in an accident. What a much nicer place than this morning. It's all back in one piece. It's now time to test the airbags. I'm going to put the camera, face it into the alarms, just see if the alarms are cleared, but I'm not being in the car when it goes, just in case the airbags go. I don't really fancy an airbag to the face. Now thankfully when I started the car, the airbags didn't deploy again. That gives us one step forward. However, when we're checking the codes here, I haven't reset anything, they are all still present at the moment. We will, however, use my diagnostics tool. I have got a small Autel machine. It does do various code resets, it does service resets, and I think it does do airbag resets, so we will give that a little try in a second. As you can see, when we go in there, everything is still there, but we'll make that disappear in a second, hopefully. And there we go. After a quick reset with the Autel, you can see that we only have the fuel reserve, set time and date because I had the battery disconnected, and the side daytime lights fault. As I mentioned in the previous video, we've still not fitted those DRL units into the headlight, but we'll get to that in a little while. So one of the things we're going to do today while getting the car ready for the body shop is actually replace this driver's door. I think it's a bit past getting repaired. I certainly wouldn't be happy with the amount of filler that would be on this door. It's actually really badly creased here, so we're going to replace it. So I've actually got this one off eBay. It isn't perfect, it is the right colour, it does have a little scratch on it, but that should be easier for a body shop to fix. So let's get cracking.
Changing out the door should be relatively easy. We should be bottom bolt here, top bolt here. We'll get the door stay, and then I think it's just the one wire. If we unclip all that, we should get the door off, we'll get the new door on, and then we'll start transferring everything across that's still attached to the door.
It really is great having help from the boys again. At this point, Ryan starts removing the door stay. This allows me to take the weight of the door while Ryan removes the 2 bolts and the hinges. I didn't realise at this point that the hinges had tapers on them to hold the door in place, so it wouldn't have fallen off anyway. The other option would have been removing the 2 E-Torx bolts on the door itself and taking the entire hinge assembly off, but since the new door has half the hinges still left, I thought I would try it this way first to help alignment when refitting the door. And now that the 2 bolts are removed, I can actually just lift the door away, and it is as simple as that. The new door then lifts right back into place and fits perfectly onto the tapers. I haven't had to make any adjustments so far, and I'm now keen to see how the overall door lines up with the rest of the car. Ryan is reconnecting the door electronics cable whilst the door stay is still disconnected and giving a little more room to finagle it into place. Then we start putting the hinge bolts back in place and tightening them up. I actually wish the door swap was all as easy as this, but I'm afraid this is just the start of it, as there's a lot of components still to swap over and we've barely scratched the surface. Now if you're still watching this, or if you've just joined us, hopefully you're enjoying what you're watching and you're going to continue watching the videos as we move along with the build. If you have, please don't forget to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, that way it lets me know if I'm doing something right. Once the door was tightened, I had to shut it and see just how well it lined up. It actually doesn't line up too bad, maybe a little adjustment to get it to 100%, and I think the front wing needs to move in ever so slightly, as I had originally lined it up with a flattened door and it sticks out the tiniest amount. I must say though, the colour match really isn't bad in person. It's a shame that the door has a big scratch in it, and I think with a good machine polish it might have been really close. However, as we want the car as close to perfect as possible, it's definitely going for paint and will be blended in properly. To access the door internals, first we need to remove the door card. This is done by removing a few small Torx screws and the use of a trim tool to remove the handle cover, revealing further Torx screws that are in behind the handle that provide the strength to the door card when pulling the door shut. We also remove the inner latch trim surrounded, revealing yet another screw. I then start to remove another piece of aftermarket LED lighting, as I just don't like it, and I actually find that the wiring was questionable on this one, having just been shoved in the back of a connector block in the door, leaving exposed wiring out the back of the plug. Door card then pulls away from the door with a little bit of force, and then we can start to disconnect the wiring to the controls for the door. This allows us to remove the window switches, and then we can take the card itself away for safe storage. Then we can start to remove the wiring loom after removing the questionable wiring I already mentioned. There is a large piece of sound deadening and probably weather protection foam inside the door. We remove that. Once that's removed, it reveals the window mechanism, and it's at this point I realise that I've actually made a mistake and got a problem. I can't actually access the bottom of the window because the window needs to be in down.
Yeah, I think we should have put the window down before we took this off. We might have to put this door back on for a minute to bring the window down, but we'll give it a have a look. Yeah, but we're going to have to take the door back off. This is why we do it. Well, we're learning as we go along. If we ever do this again, remember to put the window back down.
That's it.
Okay, so we're back, and all we've literally done is we took the door, put it back on, put the window down, and we took the glass out. So we'll continue with stripping this door again, and we'll see where we go from there.
We continue to just remove any screws that are visible to us and lay every part in order behind us to help when we start put everything back on the door. Manoeuvring the door is a lot easier with the two of us, and removing the parts is now starting to come along nicely. Some of the parts are clipped on, and a plastic trim tool helps remove some of the trims without causing any damage to them. Parts that are clipped on can be quite tight because at the end of the day they are designed to be in the wind force when the car is moving. Don't be afraid to apply a little bit of force to them, they will come off. Everything does seem to be coming off okay. I haven't damaged any bits at this point yet, and everything hopefully will start to go back on, no problem. I start to clean the door that's been fitted to the car just to make sure there's no dirt under for when we start to put the new parts on, and Ryan's just taking the last couple of bits off the door. Ryan's removing the black A-pillar trim because the spec of the car that this came off must have been a lower spec one as it's matte black and the M Sport ones are gloss black. Once again, I'm just cleaning some of the areas with an all-purpose cleaner, just making sure a lot of the dirt's off it before we put the trims back on, before we refit the handles, things like that. It will all be coming back off again for a body shop, but getting it nice and clean up front is always good. We then swap out the door latch and the wiring loom as they both appear to be slightly different. The wiring loom on the new door doesn't have puddle lights, interior ambience lights, and didn't seem to have an electric door mirror. However, the original loom easily transfers across from the old door. Start to refit the trim around the window. This comes in about 4 or 5 different pieces at various parts of the window, and it's amazing how quickly you forget the sequence you took them out in, and it takes a couple of attempts just to get them back in the right sequence. Also, when we fitted the black door trim, we realised we hadn't hooked it around the door properly, so Ryan's just redoing that just now. Again, another learning curve, but if we ever do it again, we'll remember that next time. And on to fitting all the upper door trims on the outside, and this is actually quite tight in places and it takes a good bit of shoveling to get it in. We then move on to refitting the window mechanism. This slides into place and pops through the holes in the door, and then that allows us to put the nuts on to secure it back in location. Once it's secured in location, I can start rerouting the wiring loom. This allows me to also start putting the window switch back in, because the next thing is refitting the window. And then it's back in with the window. The window slides in at an angle, carefully ensuring not to scratch or break it. It is pretty awkward to get in due to the curve in the window, but it did come out that way and just takes a little bit of perseverance. and then finally it drops down onto the runners and slides down into the door. Then it's a case of giving it one last hard click into place and the window's done. One, two. The last piece is refitting the door card in the exact opposite way it was removed, and it's good to be nearly done. However, in typical Scottish fashion, it starts raining and this wasn't on the forecast. However, as the car is currently open, we need to finish the task so we can close the door and get back in the house.
The rain's starting to get heavier.
Yep. Right. So unfortunately it did rain when we were putting the last of the door card back on there. Rain's back off again just now. Ryan's just putting in the last 4 screws and then that's the door complete. So after weeks of the 140 being away at the paint shop, I'm now left with a giant jigsaw puzzle. I'm going to go and try and put it back together, see if I can remember where everything goes. Here we go. So on time lapse here, we start off by putting all the grille trims back into the M2 style bumper. I can't say enough how good the paint is looking on this bumper and how much it really complements the shape of the bumper. However, it'll look even better when it's refitted and a couple of extra bits are added. These trims are so hard to remove, so it is a relief for going in to never be removed again. As each individual part is fitted, it really improves the strength of the bumper and it starts to hold its shape better than it did before we were fitted. It's also nice to get a break in the Scottish weather and have a dry, although cooler day to put the car back together. I can really see the advantage of having a workshop to do this kind of stuff, but I still want to show that it's totally possible to do from your drive, although I really think the neighbours are starting to think I'm mad out talking to myself for the drive all the time. It's time for the bumper to be carefully slid back into place in the front of the car. It's worth noting here that on this particular car the headlights need to be fitted first as they won't go in with the bumper back on. This is opposite from the Audi we've already done as we put the headlights back on that last. The headlights are just loosely in place at the moment as I want to line the bumper up perfectly to the wings and the bonnet first. Then I'll line up the headlights to the car as a whole, and I think that'll be easier than trying to chase everything at the same time. Only time will tell if this works, and it's only possible with the arch liners removed, as there's 3 headlight adjuster bolts under the headlights in the front arches and a further couple of bolts above the headlight under the bonnet. The bonnet and wings were already aligned from before, and I'm quite happy with the alignment of them from before. I really think the colour of the car is starting to show off the shapes of the new bumper, and the black trims really pop. So when we start to add extra bits later, it should really make the car look a bit more special than the standard car that arrived all beaten up a few months ago. The project is taking a lot longer than I expected, but that was mainly due to not realising how busy some of the local body shops are and the waiting times to get booked in. But if you want it done right, it's better to go to a busier shop than one that could take you next day. At this point, I'd like to give a huge shout out to Colin at Car and Bike Bonnybridge, and his paintwork on the car is really good quality, and the car wouldn't look half as good if he hadn't put the effort in that he did. I saw the car at various stages of the rebuild, and to see what he actually did to the car just to make it as good as it was a real credit to his work. All the bolts and screws are going back in nicely whilst being careful not to damage any of the fresh paintwork, and it's actually a credit to BMW for how easy this is to line back up, even though this is an aftermarket bumper. Also, with it being an aftermarket bumper, I was really worried that it was wouldn't fit well, but it really does fit without too much issue at all. I hope the new kit I've bought for the TT fits as well when it comes back from the paint shop too. The ABS plastic bumpers really are a lot better than the old fiberglass body kits that you would have seen on Corsas or Saxos 20 years ago, and thankfully those days are over. As much as I like Max Power back in the day, I'm not sure I'm ready for it to return. And now we'll just go to time lapse for a bit while I align the bumper. It does take a little while, but I just want to make sure it is right. I actually got carried away a bit and forgot to video me realigning the headlights too much, but as you can see it literally was just a case of wiggling them about and tightening the bolts once I felt we were in the right position. I then refit the arch liners back in the arches and fit all the 8mm screws just to hold them back in place, and that kind of finishes it under the car there. With the arch liners back in, I then proceed to clip back in one of the headlight level sensors that was missing, and that completed under the front left arch as well. The quick jacks have been great for projects like this. They are expensive, but I think they are worth the money. I do use axle stands still quite a lot, but that's generally if the car's going to be up on them for a couple of days, because I don't like leaving the quick jacks outside. We're not meant to be out in the weather for a long time, and I'm trying to keep them good. And then it was a case of carefully placing all the door trims back on. A lot of the trim around the windows just clips on, so you have to be careful not to slip and scratch your paintwork when you're pushing the trim on. Testing the operation of the window every time you put a bit on is a good idea to ensure that it is on correctly and that you aren't going to damage the window. It's also really important to make sure the trims are clean that are in contact with the window to ensure that you don't scratch a glass, as that would be a major setback for a car that really is starting to look this good. Then it's back on with the door mirror. That's just 3 screws that holds that on, and once again testing all the operation just to make sure it works. Then we put the door card back on, and that pretty much completes the door. It really is nice to see it coming back together, and it's starting to look like a complete car again. I do have a few things that are still in store for the car, and it really will look good once it's done. Then it's time to temporarily put the wheels back on, as I need to fit the side skirt. but that is one downside to the quick jacks, as they sit where the side skirts are and I can't access the screws underneath while it's still in the air. When I said the wheels are going back on temporarily, I will be getting them refurbished. I did look at changing to different wheels, maybe going up a size, but I do actually quite like the OEM wheels. They are all scraped a little bit, so do need a refurb, but I do also want to make them stand out a little further by changing them slightly, but I'll show you that later once it's done. I then lower the car off the quick jacks and slide it out of the way before I can get into the side skirt. Refitting the side skirt is simply a case of clipping it on at the top and then pushing in a number of plastic torque screws under the bottom side of the side skirt to hold it in place underneath. Really is as simple as that, and was one of the easier jobs putting the car back together. Then it's time to start adding the little details like the M Sport badges. I opted for genuine BMW replacements, and they weren't cheap, but I bought black ones instead of chrome. I think with the black trims on the car it just suits it better. After a quick Google search, I found the placement of the badges to be 12.5 inches up from the bottom of the panel and 1 3/4 inches in from the side of the panel. It's important to ensure that these little details are correct in order for it to look right and be how it should have come from the factory. Then it was on to the rear badge. As it was already fitted, I marked out the position with masking tape and proceeded to carefully remove the old badge with a plastic scraper in order to ensure that I didn't damage the paintwork on the tailgate. Once the badge is off, I then use a glue remover solvent to take off the last of the double-sided tape holding the original badge, and a DA polisher to clean up the area where the badge was. Finally then applying the new genuine black BMW badge in the place of the old one, and I think you'll all agree that this looks much better than the original one, and it's also nice knowing it's another genuine part used and not a cheap copy.
So that's the car pretty much back in one piece now. All the badges back on. It's actually looking really good. It's time to start doing some modifications. I've got some body kit. Got to start putting that on now.
So we start on the rear of the car, and specifically the valance and the exhausts. The valance is held on at the bottom with two 8mm head screws and two clips. We then remove vent and the valance simply pulls off. Then the standard exhaust tips are just pressed onto the exhaust. These hammer off with a rubber mallet. The left one was a bit more stubborn and awkward than the right one due to the exhaust valve being in the way, but we got it off in the end. rust exhaust tips would have probably cleaned up quite well, and with them being black wouldn't have been too bad for the look of the car. However, with the body kit that is about to be fitted, I think the new tips will just go that much better with the new rear valance and be more sized to the outlets on the bottom of the valance. Also, while we're hammering away here, that reminds me, if you've made it this far into the video and want to see more cars and content, as I will be looking for a new main project soon, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel and help the channel grow.
So the standard exhaust tips for me just quite big enough. They were the black ones, but they are a little bit tatty, so we've got to put nicer ones on. And we have the VZM Sport ones. Much bigger, much nicer.
The new tips are just temporarily slid into place, as there's a locating pin for the standard tips that are holding them out a bit too far, and as you will see when the valance goes back on, they are actually sticking out like wheelbarrow handles, so I am going to have to come back and do a little bit of modification a bit later on once everything's fitted. The new gloss black valance clips into place in the exact holes that the old one was removed from, and it is an excellent fit. I really think it is a much more aggressive look for the car that complements the car overall with its new facelift at the front. I will have to take the reflectors from the old valance and fit them into this valance, but I'll do that in a little while once I've got everything back in place. As you can see though, the exhausts really do stick out too far for the look of the bumper. However though, as I said, I will come back and fix that in just a short while. Then with the front splitter we've gone gloss black with this too. I applied some double-sided sticky tape to the splitter to help me locate it in place on the car, and with both the splitter and bumper being aftermarket, I really was pleasantly surprised at how perfect they fit onto each other. Once the splitter was in place, it was simply a case of fully securing using some tech screws along the underside just to ensure it was permanently held in place. I have previously used Tiger Seal on these before, but I felt that this time it was better not to, as the car sits low and if it gets smashed it'll be so much easier to replace in the long run. And again, as with the back, I really think the black splitter, it really complements the bumper and just finishes it off just that bit better. It really does look quite aggressive and looks as though it should have came like that from the factory.
So it's a couple of days later, I sent the BMW wheels away to get refurbished, so that's why I've not finished the video yet. We're now back from refurbishment, so it's time to finish the car. We're going to do a couple of little jobs that I've been wanting to get done, so I've still got the side skirts to fit. Now that it's not in the quick jacks, I get wheels back on, and I want to fix the exhausts. The exhausts I didn't actually like when I put them on the other day. They stick out like wheelbarrows, so they will be getting sorted and addressed this morning. We'll give the car a service and then that'll be it done.
Servicing the car is easy enough, even for any beginner to tackle at home if you have the confidence to try it yourself. A quick Google search can tell you the amounts of oil etc that you need, and most Motor Factors websites now also point you to the correct type of consumables and even tell you the amounts. I've been using a site called OP Oils for all my service and stuff lately, as they're good for price, quick delivery and also give a massive choice of components on an easy to use website. I've already removed the sump plug here. It's a 17mm nut on the bottom of the engine just behind the engine cover underneath. I will replace this with a new one and new copper washer to seal it before putting the oil back in. This particular car takes 6.2 litres of oil, but it doesn't have a dipstick, so the only way to check it's done right is to start the car at the end and let it warm up and measure itself. Replacing the oil filter here couldn't be simpler on this car too. It's at the top of the engine on the passenger side and is simply a case of unscrewing and replacing the element. Also changing the rubber O-ring for new, which is supplied with the new filter. I also put a smear of oil on the new O-ring just to help it seal and slide back in better when refitting. Once the sump plug's back in, simply pour back in the required oil of the correct spec. In this case 5W30, which seems to be common with a lot of modern cars these days. Once the oil change is completed, I opted to change the air filter. It was good to see that the air filter that came out was actually quite fresh looking, and that coincides with the last time it was serviced just before it was crashed. The air filter housing lid unclips and it already clean in there, so I simply pop in the new K&N panel filter and that's another job done.
So with the exhaust, the locating pin when you're pushing the standard exhaust tip in to keep it straight is actually preventing this from going any further. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this back off, we're going to grind that pin off and we'll move that back in. I do think that when we move it back in, we might cut a little bit off the exhaust, but we'll see how that goes when it does it. Also put the bracket now on the other side, it was missing the other day. We'll get these back in, we'll get them sitting a bit more flush, and so they'll look like wheelbarrow handles.
So then it's back off with the exhaust tips, as I need to grind off the locating pin on the exhaust to allow me to better position the new carbon tips. I quickly realised that I should have done this before fitting the valance, and once again I have to remove the valance to access better with my grinder. Then grind off both the locating pins and ensure that the remaining pipe is down to a smooth finish so that the new tips slide over without catching it, and I must say there is something quite therapeutic about destruction whilst creating sparks. I feel like a kid with a sparkler on bonfire night here. The new tips then immediately slide right down the exhaust into a much better position. I can then refit the rear valance for the final time and measure up the exhaust tips using a steel rule, ensuring that they're now a lot further in than they were before. Although they still look big, now they look a lot better as they don't quite stick out as far and more how they should look. It takes a fair bit of fettling just to make sure that they're both sitting right. It's also quite satisfying to see some of the extra money spent on extra bits starting to pay off and completes the look I wanted. The only disappointing bit is I don't have Ryan with me as he's back at school at the moment and I needed to get the car done. Lastly, it's off with the ghastly dealer number plates that's been on the car since new and clean up the area ready for a new plate to be fitted. Once again, a quick polish of the area just to make sure it's as clean as it can be. And then it's on with the new tapered 3D gel plate just to give it something a little bit different at the back. and I think it looks a lot better just with the shape of the valance and the aggressiveness of it. For me, just completing the look that I'm going for on the car and just really finishing the back off. And finally, to complete the rear, the reflectors are put back on with some adhesive as seen on some of our channels, holding cars together, using tiger seal here as the clips had to be cut because the valance holes were different to the OEM reflectors.
So one of the things I couldn't do the other day was side skirts. It was on the quick jacks, so it was able to get it. Now it's sitting on axle stands, I have full access to the bottom of the side skirts. So I've got to just put them on just now. I've got a double sided sticky tape. I already gave underneath nice clean, and I'll put some hex screws in after that, and then that hopefully put them on pretty solid, and we'll see how it looks.
So once again, the side skirt extensions are temporarily held in place with a small line of double-sided sticky tape. This helps get it roughly where you want it and lined up with the line along the bottom of the side skirt. Once happy with its position, I once again use hex screws to permanently fix it to the original side skirt. Lastly, refitting the wheels now that they've been refurbished. I've gone for silver just to brighten them up a bit, in contrast with the gloss black body kit against the Valencia orange paintwork. I think it makes the wheels stand out and actually look a bit bigger, whilst retaining a sort of OEM look. And finally, after a couple of months of learning and hard work, the car is finished. And it's gone from this, what was a good base but albeit damaged standard BMW M140i, to this. And wow, what a difference. It really does look like a different car. Amazing the results you can achieve if you just put in a bit of effort.
Yeah, I gotta keep dreaming, gotta keep going, yeah, I gotta keep pushing, gotta keep breathing, yeah, I gotta keep working, yeah, at least for the moment, start with $1 million, and I want my mansion, so my family knows that, we are set for life, yeah, ain't nothing that's gonna take over, shit, nobody gonna take it, but I grab it, I'ma have it, I've been cutting my habits, so I gotta do it, man, I tell them the madness, cause every really better, man, I want my status, damn, they gonna see that I do this, they gonna see that I did this, though, now they say, oh shit, I can't do the same when you kidding, bro, cause I spend my time just working, but I spend my time just grinding, and I spend my time in the studio with these lyrics, just combining, just fortune all these diamonds, cause I made it from far, and nobody believed it, but I showed them what I was,
And throughout this build, I've absolutely fallen in love with this car. Unfortunately, I can't keep it because I need to sell it so I can fund the next project. So it will be going up for sale, but thank you for watching this video. I really appreciate any time you spent watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and see what we get next. Thank you. Peace.